Using the fastest cars in the game in the grand races is not going to make you win those races if you're not a good driver. However, being in slower cars is also not going to help you place higher in the grand races. So with that, we have the grand race meta update video. Let's go. Real quick before I get into the video, if you're looking for a community of racers to play with, join our Discord. There's a link in the description down below. That's also where I do all of my giveaways, and we have every topic in there from the Crew Motorfest, the Crew 2, to Need for Speed Heat, Need for Speed Unbound, everything Need for Speed, and all kinds of other racing games. There's over 14,000 members there, so hit that link and join us. All right, let's get into this. All right, so before I get into the actual cars, I just want to tell you how I've organized this video. I've got 11 different categories. Those are the categories of racing that you are going to be doing in the grand races. That means I don't have like drag racing in here, or I don't have boats in here, right? We have just the categories for the grand races on this video. That being said, we've got 3 different tiers of meta, and that doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to tell you what it is. Basically, I've got the best in the category, then I've got contenders who are actually pretty close to the best cars, and then I've got cars that are actually viable. Now, the viable cars are definitely not going to beat any of the other cars in that category, but they are nice alternatives. They perform pretty well. They can definitely help you place a little bit higher than using a slow car, and they're cars that I actually genuinely like using just when I feel like I'm needing a bigger challenge, or I just want to mix things up and not use the exact same cars over and over again. They're just really good, solid alternatives. So let's get into this. Let's start with Street 1. So in Street 1, last month we had the Ford Focus RS, and it is still one of the top dogs, but we found the Corvette C2 2.0 edition. This is an exclusive car from the Crew 2, so if you don't have this, the Focus RS is the way to go. But both of these cars deserve to be here for different reasons. The Corvette actually, in my opinion, has a lot more power. It's a lot better when it comes to taking gutter turns and things like that. The Focus is very slidey. No matter what you do to the tuning, it tends to lose traction. However, the Focus has very good top speed, and so it deserves to be there. Those are the 2 best cars for Street 1. Now, there is one car that I would put in the contender category, and that's the RX-7 Turbo. That RX-7 is very good. It handles better than the Focus. It's easier to drive than the Focus, especially with a right tune on it, but it just doesn't have the top speed to keep up with it. So if you have a situation where the Street 1 category is wide open, it's basically all highway, or it's that road that goes along the coastline, it's tough to use the RX-7 because even with slip, you're going to watch that Focus just slightly inch away from you because of top speed ability. So it's a contender. It is good, and you can beat Focus drivers, but it's not better than the Focus at this point. Now, there are 3 cars that I would recommend as alternatives, and these are cars that I would consider to be viable in the grand race, but not necessarily the best. You've got a 240 SX, that's the S14. It is solid. It is a very solid, it's fast, it does its thing, but it just can't keep up with those other 3 cars. And then next is the BMW M2. Once again, it's got a lot of speed to it. It just doesn't handle as well as the other cars. And then lastly, I've got the Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT8. Again, very fast, and this one's actually really quick off the line, and it actually has very good top speed. It just doesn't handle very well at all. It's a big, heavy car, and it's tough to take on a lot of those like really tight turns. All right, moving on to Street 2. So in Street 2, there were 3 cars, in my opinion, at the top of the list, and these are the 3 best cars for Street 2. Number 1 is going to be the 911, which is the Porsche 911 993. This car is very good. It's definitely the best in the category. However, it's very close with the Corvette ZR1. Last month, the ZR1 was featured along with the Hurricane, and the Hurricane is definitely here as well. So the best 3 cars, the 911 993, the ZR1, and the Lamborghini Hurricane. All 3 of those cars are very good, almost interchangeable. I think the 911 gets a slight edge because of its acceleration and handling, but all 3 cars are extremely competitive with each other. Now, moving on to the contenders for Street 2, I've got the F12 Berlinetta. That car is very good. I mean, it is really close to those other cars, but I think it just gets inched out just by a little bit, as well as the F40. The F40 is awesome to drive. It's very fun to drive in Street 2, but I just don't feel like it's there with those top three. And then the Ford GT, the 2005 Ford GT, that thing is very fun to drive. It's very powerful and it handles extremely well. It just doesn't have the top speed to keep up with the others. Now moving on to the viable cars, the viable alternatives for Street 2, we've got the Diablo, again, a powerhouse. It's a slow shifting car, and so it just has these little things that keep it from being a top dog. The Corvette C8 Stingray, very nice car. This is one that you get, I believe, for completing, I can't remember which playlist actually. I think it might be the Donut Media playlist. You get for completing one of the playlists. That C8 Stingray is actually very good, very solid to drive. The Honda NSX is really good, and I almost put that one in the contenders because it is super good, as we were able to see here in this week's summit. But this Honda NSX might be moving up the ladder a little bit as we get better tunes and we start to figure out a little bit how to drive it, but it's just right there. It's a good contender at this point in time. And then lastly, the Porsche Taycan. The Taycan is very interesting because the Taycan is very good when it comes to tight corners because it accelerates so well outside of them. However, it just doesn't have the top speed, and so it loses out a lot in some of those races because a lot of Street 2 courses in the Grand Race have this weird, like, you know, top speed section or highway section or whatever you want to call it, but not all of the courses have these crazy tight turns, which is where this car excels. But when you get it into one of those places where just like all tight turns for Street 2, that thing is way better than anything else on the list. So I had to include it as a viable alternative in Street 2. All right, let's move on to the drift category. This one's pretty easy. So we've got the Aventador and the Murcielago as the best cars in the class. Basically, like any of the hypercar looking drift cars are gonna do better, but the Aventador and the Murcielago are definitely the top dogs right now. And then the contender, the only contender I really have right now is the Agera R. The Agera R is good. It's just really slippy. It's got a lot of power, and so that one is just kind of like, it's there. It's fast, but I would prefer to drive the Aventador or the Murcielago. All right, moving on to the racing category. There are 3 cars that I would put in the best category for racing, and that is the Gallardo Super Trofeo, the Camaro SS, and the Ferrari 458. All 3 of those cars are extremely fast and handle extremely well. The 458 is maybe my personal favorite of the 3, but I actually think the Gallardo Super Trofeo is actually the faster car. It's a little bit more oversteery and it loses traction a little bit sooner than the 458. So personally, I like the 458 over the Super Trofeo, and I've used both quite a bit, but I'm not saying the Gallardo is bad by any means. I actually think it's probably the fastest car in the category. And then the Camaro SS has a ridiculous handling. It is glued to the road, but it does understeer a little bit in situations. So that one is maybe a little bit lower than the other 2, but all 3 of them contend with each other. Now let's move on to the contenders for the category, and that is going to be the FXXK Evo. The FXXK is going to be the choice, I think, for pretty much anyone that has maybe a little bit less skill. It is very easy to control and it handles very nicely, and it's got pretty good top speed. It just has a little struggle to get to top speed, so if you can find a slipstream or by using NOS, you can get there, but it just struggles just a tiny bit to get to top speed, but the ability is there. And then secondly, for the contenders, I would put the Ford GT Airfoil Edition. This was a summit reward just a while ago. If you don't have it, I don't recommend the regular one. This Airfoil Edition does handle better than the regular GT in the category. So if you don't have it, then go with the FXXK. And then finally, I'm gonna put this in the viable category because I don't think it's a contender at all. It just understeers way too much, and that's the Bolide. The Bolide is very fast. However, it understeers like crazy, and when you're taking turns at high speeds like that, it just really isn't good for the category. You have to drive it and you have to know the lines that you're taking, so it takes a little bit more skill to be fast with that car. So anyway, you can use it. It's definitely viable, but it's not something that I would recommend necessarily. All right, let's move on to the hypercar section. At the very top of the hypercar section, I'm going to give the Agera R the nod. Now, I used to be a 110 fan, and I love the EB111, and both of those cars I would consider to be almost equal with the Agera, but the Agera R inches them out just a little bit, and it's because of its ability to take turns at high speeds. It oversteers like crazy, but it's super gripped up when it comes to high speed turns, and that's basically what you're going to be doing in a hypercar. It has a ridiculous amount of power, so the back end slides out, and it's one of the most difficult cars to drive. But when you get the hang of it, it is the fastest car in the class right now. Now we haven't discovered the next fastest car, but for now, that's the one. I strongly recommend the EB110 and the Cento Dieci as well. Both of those cars are in the best category. I really like all three, but the Agera R is definitely the top dog. If we go to the contenders for the hypercar category, I would put the Jesko in there. It's very, very fast, but again, very hard to handle, and it's kind of heavy. So it's not the best choice, but it definitely is right there. I mean, it can run ridiculous times on these test courses that I use. And then the Revuelto is kind of in the same category, handles amazing, but it's just not as fast as the top three. So both of those are good contenders for you. As far as cars that are like viable in the hypercar class, I would put the 911 GT1, which is that longer Porsche. It's called the Strassen version as well. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And then the 918 Spider, which is actually the default car in hypercar. If you don't have a hypercar, the 918 is what you get. The 918 is not that great, but it's also not bad. I mean, it actually handles pretty well, and it's got very good traction. So it's one of those cars that just like, it's there and it's in the viable category. All right, let's move on to Alpha GP. So there's a couple of cars in Alpha GP that I would recommend right now. The top dog, in my opinion, is the Alpha Mark II. But to be really honest, your driving skills affect how you do in the Alpha GP category way more than anything else. And I know you could say that for every category in the game. However, it's extremely important in Alpha GP. There's so much room for error. You're driving so fast and the cars are so twitchy and so grippy. So your driving skills are going to matter way more. Like if you're driving one car and your friend is driving a different car and you're slipstreaming, you guys are going to be going the same speed pretty much the entire time. It's not going to be a big deal. However, for me, the Alpha Mark II handles a little bit better, and it doesn't lose the back end as much as the RB18, which the RB18 is going to be my contender. So the RB18 tends to lose the back end a little bit easier on some of those tight switchback corners, and so that's why I've got it in the contender category. But the Alpha Mark II, definitely the way to go in my opinion. All right, let's move on to motocross. For me, there's really only one bike you should choose, and that's the 450 EXC Nighthawk Edition. All the other bikes kind of feel similar. I said this in the last Grand Race meta video. However, I like this 450 EXC. It seems to have a little bit better top speed, but as of this video, there's only one motocross path that we have in the Grand Race, and so basically all of the bikes can handle that path pretty well. But I prefer the Nighthawk. All right, let's move on to the Rally Raid category. At the top of this category, I'm gonna put the BMW Z4 alongside the Wrangler Evo 2. Both cars, for different reasons, do very well. The Z4, in my opinion, has better traction in some of the tighter like switchback turns, but the Evo 2 seems to have better top speed. Both cars take water very, very easily. Both cars are pretty easy to drive when you're bombing down those big hills with the jumps and things. And so for me, I use both of these cars, but for different reasons. Z4 on tighter turns, Wrangler on more open, straight courses. And that's it for the best Rally Raid cars. Let's move on to the contenders for Rally Raid, and that is the 959 Raid and the Skyline GTR R34. Both of those cars are very good. There's nothing wrong with them. You can win with them, but neither one of them is going to like make you make a comeback in a grand race. It's not going to be because of the car, it's going to be because of your driving that you're able to make that comeback. These cars are not OP at all, but they're right there. You know, they're just a little bit outside. The viable cars, and these cars are actually really fun to drive. I enjoy driving these cars. The Toyota Tacoma, it's got great top speed, like really, really good top speed. So when you're bombing down hills or if you're on flat ground, that thing will pass a lot of cars in this game. In addition to that, I would recommend the Race Touareg 3. It's a Volkswagen car. That thing actually does really, really well for how big it is. It's got some good power. And then finally, the Mazda MX-5 Miata. Again, it's good. It has pretty good handling. It kind of is like the poor man's Z4. It handles well, but it just doesn't have like the real raw speed that the other cars have. So those three definitely in the viable category, and I think all three of those are very fun to drive. All right, moving on to the rally category. At the very top is the C3 Racing. That's the Citroen C3. It is by far head and shoulders better than all of the other rally cars. However, let's look at the contenders for the category, because the C3 was the top dog for the last video. Now the contenders, the Lancer WRC05 has very good top speed. It's just a little bit too slippy. And then the Mini Cooper S. Mini Cooper S handles very similarly to the C3, but it just doesn't have that raw speed. It's just like slightly slower. So it's a contender and you can use it. However, the C3 is going to win the majority of the time. And then finally, the two cars that I would consider viable for the category. These cars are good, but not great. We've got the Exige S, which has good speed. It actually keeps up good speed on these rally sections. However, it just doesn't handle like the other ones. And then finally, the 911 GT3. This one has great top speed and actually is good for going in a straight line, but it just doesn't handle, again, like the other cars. It has a little bit of a slow acceleration when you slide around like some of those hairpin turns. It just doesn't get up to speed as fast, and you end up using a lot more NOS to use that car. Now, finally, the last two categories of this video, we've got Monster Truck and we've got planes. For Monster Truck, you should be using the Silverado, no doubt about it. There's not any other monster truck that I can see that's anywhere close to the Silverado. It handles better. As far as top speed goes, all of the monster trucks are very similar, so you don't have to worry about that. But this one accelerates better and it handles better than every other monster truck. So start using the Silverado. That's the one to go with. And then for the planes, the P51 Mustang is by far the fastest plane in the game. It is just ridiculous fast. You can keep it above 200 miles per hour, no problem at all, by using a little bit of NOS here and there. It's definitely the one to go to. And just a quick recommendation, if you have the option to take a plane or a rally raid vehicle, then always pick the plane. But if it's plane or Alpha GP, it's kind of a toss-up in terms of which one is going to be faster. I tend to always pick the plane. I think the plane just generally goes faster. So anyway, that is it. So if you have any questions about this video, please do not hesitate to send me a DM on Instagram, Twitter, or Discord. I'm going to be trying to update this on a monthly basis if we have enough changes to the meta. If there's only like one car here and there, then I won't be sending out this video every single month, but we'll update it as we get new cars, and it'll probably happen towards the end of a month. So anyway, enjoy the cars. We had a lot of new additions to the list this month, and I'm guessing we're going to have a lot of new additions to the next month because the game is so fresh and so new. But that is the meta at this current moment. And if I've missed anyone, please don't hesitate to put that in the comments. Save the community the time for searching different Discords and Reddit and all that. Put it in the comments of this video so we can see what you're using and what you find to be fast, because we want to get the fastest cars out there as soon as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Trigger out.